This is The Briefing. I'm Sally Bundock. Our top stories. The US Federal Reserve cuts interest rates for the second time to protect the world's biggest economy from the worst consequences of the coronavirus pandemic. As Germany imposes border restrictions and Spain imposes a lockdown, we'll have the latest on the stress placed on emergency services and health workers. The UK government comes under pressure to clarify its strategy on mass gatherings and how hospitals and schools should respond. And last orders in New York and Los Angeles as bars, restaurants and cafes close down. In Business Briefing, with major sporting events cancelled or postponed, how does the sector survive the coronavirus outbreak? Good to have you with us. This is Monday's briefing. We'll make sure you're across all you need to know in global news, in business and in sport. And you can be a part of the conversation. Do tell us what you think about the stories we're covering or what you're spotting where you are. Just use the hashtag BBC The Briefing. We begin today with coordinated action from central banks around the world, led by the US Federal Reserve. It's taken concerted action to halt the economic slump provoked by the coronavirus pandemic. The Fed slashed interest rates by a full percentage point on Sunday and announced a multi-billion-dollar package of quantitative easing to encourage spending. It said it expected a rate of virtually zero to be maintained until the bank was confident the economy had weathered events. Here's President Trump's response.
The Federal Reserve is going to be purchasing $500 billion of treasuries and $200 billion of mortgage-backed securities, and that number can increase. But they're going to start with that, and that's really good news. It's really great for our country. It's something that we're very happy. I have to say this. I'm very happy. And
he's very happy, but financial markets have mixed feelings about the actions and how effective they will be in helping the global economy. Let's talk to Mariko Oy, who's in our bureau in Singapore for the latest on financial markets. Mariko, what was the reaction in Asia?
Well, as you said, it's a little bit mixed. So, for example, let me show you how Japan's Nikkei is currently trading, down just a tad, but it's been in and out of the negative territory because the Bank of Japan has also moved its monetary meeting from later this week to today. And they started meeting about 2 hours ago. I'm seeing a lot of traders being frustrated. Where's the announcement? But a lot of investors have been hoping that they will make some kind of an announcement to stimulate the economy. And that's why Japan's Nikkei is doing okay so far. But if you look at other markets like Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index, that's down by more than 2%. And that's the same story across the region. We're seeing a lot of down arrows throughout this morning, which is probably not what President Trump had expected when he said that he was very happy with the Fed's decision. And that's being indicated in the US futures as well. If you look at how that's been trading, we're seeing a lot of down arrows there as well. So it seems like investors have been somewhat spooked by the fact that the Fed had to react so quickly because its scheduled meeting was just in a couple of days, that they had to actually move the decision forward to a Sunday evening, which is quite unprecedented. And that goes to show how the Fed is worried about the situation, and it could actually be worse than a lot of economists and investors have been anticipating.
So we had this news from the Fed, but also at the same time, a lot of data coming out of China just showing what damage has been done so far.
Indeed, we got the first batch of Chinese economic data coming out this morning, and it's a lot worse than expected. If you actually take a look at some of the data, like retail sales down more than 20% in the month of February compared to a year ago. Economists have been predicting some disappointing, depressing figures, but not as grim as this, as well as industrial output coming in almost 15% lower as well. So that that goes to show how the pandemic has affected China's economy nearly 2 months ago, and how a lot of cities had to go into lockdown and how that affected China's economy. And of course, now we're seeing this pandemic spreading across the world, and how that could also have a similar impact elsewhere. And that's why a lot of economists are now predicting that this could actually lead to a global recession.
All right, Marika, thank you very much indeed. We'll see you again in Business Briefing in about half an hour. We also have with us today Jeremy Thomson-Cook, Chief Economist at Equals Group. Good to have you here. So, in terms of what the central banks have announced in terms of coordinated action, what does that look like and what does it mean for us?
We've seen, off the top of my head, probably 12 central banks over the course of the past 4 or 5 trading days announce cuts in their interest rates and the ability to allow businesses access to cheaper funding, so hopefully they can tide themselves over during this period where we're seeing, demand from consumers, demand from businesses really fall off a cliff.
And with the Fed reducing rates to zero pretty much, also enabling money to be available, $700 billion worth of so-called quantitative easing. It feels very familiar, doesn't it, to back in 2008. But will this be effective in terms of stemming, I don't know, a global recession?
Yeah, I mean, it's the kind of thing where we have to sit there and say, this is what the Fed can do. The Fed can't change tax policy, it can't increase government spending, but this is the lever. These are the levers that they are able to pull. A cut in interest rates down to historical lows, and $700 billion worth of additional spending is enough to A, support the banking system, and B, allow those banks to be able to support the businesses that they have accounts with them and have lending relationships with them. The key thing for me and you, for example, and how we go about our daily business is what government does as far as fiscal spending, whether we see tax breaks for small and medium-sized businesses, whether we see just payments made by payments made by government to individuals or businesses to be able to tide them over. And that's what we're still waiting for, and that's why markets are still pessimistic, because that's probably the silver bullet more than
it's quite interesting because in 2008 it was the banks that were being bailed out. There's some sectors, some industries that will need that kind of financial support. I'm just thinking of airlines, for example. Yeah,
you have to think about airlines. You have to think about anywhere where people come together, and that's going to be travel, that's going to be airlines, that's going to be restaurants, that's going to be bars, cinemas, gyms, everywhere where you could possibly queue for something or are delayed by an influx of people.
Or sit next to someone.
Or sit next to someone, or have a face-to-face conversation with someone, or in a large group. There is going to be considerable pain there.
All right. You go back to an empty green room. He's in isolation in the green room, and you'll come back in here.
I have coffee, that's what I need.
We'll see you soon for the news briefing. Now, across Europe, the number of coronavirus infections has gone up sharply. Italy, Spain and France have all recorded their highest death tolls in a single day. Strict measures have come into force across the continent to try to limit the spread, including the closure of schools, shops, businesses and the sealing of borders. Rich Preston has the latest.
A wave of restrictions across Europe, from the closure of borders to the shutting of schools, restaurants and businesses. Millions of people have been told to stay at home. As the number of cases climbs in Germany, it's announced it'll seal its borders with France, Austria and Switzerland. People without good reason will not be allowed to cross into the country. Commuters and goods vehicles will be exempt. There are now more than 4,800 confirmed coronavirus cases in the country and have been 12 deaths. In the Netherlands, which has seen more than 1,100 cases, bars, restaurants and cafes will be closed.
Laatste ronde, last round.
In Amsterdam, queues outside cannabis cafes with customers hoping to make a purchase before the doors shut. Croatia says anyone arriving from a country with COVID-19 infections must self-isolate for 14 days. European Union members have been told the best way to get through the crisis is to pool resources and to work together to start making essential life-saving equipment.
We are working with the industry to ramp up production. Second, we need to keep in the EU the protective equipment that we need. This is why we adopted today an export authorization scheme for protective equipment. This means that such medical goods can only be exported to non-EU countries with the explicit authorization of the EU governments.
In the Czech Republic, people are only allowed to go out to go to and from work, and buy food or medicine and make urgent family visits. Otherwise, the instructions are to stay at home. In Poland, Mass held in empty churches. Austria is banning any gatherings, public or private, of more than 5 people. In Ireland, pubs will be closed. Pressure is mounting on governments to act rigorously to limit the spread of the disease and to put measures in place to be able to deal with the increasingly large number of cases. Rich Preston, BBC News.
Let's brief you now on other stories making the news. New Zealand's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has confirmed the country is to ban gatherings of more than 500 people. Schools and universities will be excluded from the rule for now, but that may be revised. She also said there would be zero tolerance for anyone who violates the country's new self-isolation rules. The South African President Cyril Ramaphosa has declared a national state of disaster following the coronavirus outbreak. He said citizens from high-risk countries would be denied entry and screening would be strengthened at all major airports. Brazil's President Jair Bolsonaro has left self-isolation to greet pro-government supporters protesting against the Congress. He was seen shaking hands and taking selfies outside the presidential palace in Brasilia. Mr. Bolsonaro put himself into quarantine after at least 5 members of his delegation tested positive for coronavirus over the last week. In China, for the 3rd consecutive day, new cases of the virus that were contracted outside the country outweighed those that originated in the country. As a result, Beijing's city government has ordered all international arrivals to go into quarantine facilities for 14 days. In all, China has now imported 123 cases from abroad out of a total of just under 81,000. Here in the UK, the Prime Minister is stepping up efforts to keep the public informed about its plans for tackling the coronavirus outbreak and how to protect themselves. Boris Johnson will hold the first daily news briefing today after facing criticism over the government's communications strategy. The number of people who've died of the virus in the UK has risen to 35, an increase of 14 in 24 hours. Simon Jones reports.
This is something we're now going to be seeing on a daily basis. The Prime Minister and senior ministers, supported by scientific and medical experts, holding briefings, following criticism that there's been a lack of transparency over plans to stem the spread of the virus. Many people admit they're anxious, particularly after the government said that in the coming weeks, everyone over the age of 70 could be told to stay at home, potentially for a period of months.
It's just scary, and straight away it scares my husband. Because he's in that age bracket.
I don't fancy being locked away for a few weeks.
Ahead of today's news conference, there'll be a meeting here at the Cabinet Office of the government's Emergency Cobra Committee. That will look at the next steps in shielding the vulnerable and elderly from the virus and consider whether mass gatherings should be banned. There'll also be a phone call involving the leaders of the G7 nations in which Boris Johnson will urge them to put more money and expertise into speeding up the development of a vaccine. Among those to have lost their lives is retired police officer Nick Matthews, who was 59. He had previously suffered a heart attack. His wife described him as her soulmate. And Jez Martinez's 78-year-old grandfather died at Wickham Hospital in Buckinghamshire. She says he had tested positive for coronavirus.
It was very shocking. Obviously, we are grieving. There's been a lot going on as obviously now the testing has been stopped, but now the worry is for the rest of my family and everybody else that may go through this.
To ease demand on the emergency services, the Scottish Government says gatherings of more than 500 people should be cancelled from today. And head teachers, feeling the pressure too, will meet the Education Secretary to discuss their concerns. British holidaymakers have been facing a battle to get home after countries like Spain went into lockdown. This was a scene at the airport in Tenerife. And in the US, the race is on to get out before transatlantic flights are grounded.
The stress levels have changed. Been feeling very, very anxious and just really wanting just to have the security of getting on that plane and taking off.
The sense of uncertainty has meant panic buying in the shops is continuing. It's clear that daily life will not be normal for some time to come. Simon Jones, BBC News.
Stay with us, so much more to come on the briefing, including more on the impact of the coronavirus on sports schedules and why Italy has called for the 2020 Euro competition to be postponed.
Today we have closed the book on apartheid and that chapter.
More than 3,000 subway passengers were affected. Nausea, bleeding, headaches and a dimming of vision. All of this caused by an apparently organised attack.
The trophy itself is on the pedestal in the middle of the cabinet here. Now this was an international trophy, and we understand now that the search for it has become an international search.
Above all, this was a triumph for the Christian Democrats of the West, offering reunification as quickly as possible, and that's what the voters wanted.
This is the briefing on BBC News, the headlines. Germany imposes border restrictions on 5 countries as the death toll rises in Europe. Drastic action from the US Federal Reserve to tackle coronavirus. It's cut interest rates to 0.25% and announces coordinated action with other central banks. New York and Los Angeles have become the latest American states to issue regulations closing bars and restaurants, cinemas and theatres. Let's talk this through with David Willis, who is in Los Angeles for us. David, just talk us through these latest measures being taken into effect.
Well, let's start with New York, Sally, where the mayor there, Bill de Blasio, is urging people to come to the acceptance that combating the coronavirus will involve them adopting what he called a wartime mentality. Now, New York is closing not only bars and restaurants at his order, but also cinemas and other entertainment places, theatres, as well. Several other states, Ohio, Illinois and Massachusetts, are following suit, and the governor of California, Gavin Newsom, California is America's most populous state, he is also urging bars and restaurants to close down or make themselves available only for pickup or delivery. All of this follows President Trump's warning to Americans not to stockpile essentials such as toilet paper and hand cleanser and so on. He told a press conference that America's supply chain, as he put it, remains robust.
And everyone is braced for how Wall Street will open later when Monday trading begins. What is the feeling among people, David, as you talk to people about how this is all being handled?
Well, I think there's a lot of concern here, Sally. President Trump was responding to the fact that there has been panic buying in grocery stores, many parts of this country. And that move by the US Federal Reserve, America's central bank, to bring down interest rates to virtually zero here, a sign of how the economy, there are concerns about how the economy here could be impacted. It is the world's largest economy, of course. And the Fed announcing this on a Sunday evening, would you believe, clearly believes there is a lot of risk to the health of the economy here and the global economy as well. It's hoping that by cutting interest rates that will shore up small businesses, giving them less interest to pay, ditto those with credit cards here. But how much it will actually do to get people out and spending again, I think remains to be seen, Sally.
All right. Thank you very much indeed, David Willis, for us with the latest on that. Now, for the first time in 3 weeks, South Korea has reported fewer than 100 new coronavirus cases. The country has the highest number of cases in Asia after China, with over 8,000 confirmed infections and 75 deaths. But South Korea seems to be enjoying a downward trend in new cases now. Here's the country's foreign minister explaining how.
The basic principle is openness, transparency, and fully keeping the public informed. And I think this is paying off. Testing is central because that leads to early detection, it minimizes further spread, and it quickly treats those found with the virus. And I think that's the key behind our very low fatality rate as well.
However, one Protestant church in the country's 10th largest city, Seongnam, has alarmed local authorities. 40 members of the River Grace Community Church, including the pastor and his wife, have tested positive now for COVID-19 after attending a Sunday service about a week ago. 6 other people who had come into contact with the infected church members have also been confirmed as having the virus. Now, coronavirus has prevented many sporting events to not take place over the weekend. So let's check in on the latest developments on that and the sport which has been able to go ahead. It's over to the BBC Sports Centre.
Hello, I'm Chetan Partek with Monday's sport briefing. We start with the Italian Football Federation, which is now calling for UEFA's Euro 2020, set to be played from the middle of June, to be postponed so that the Serie A season can be extended. Like all major European football leagues, matches are currently suspended because of coronavirus. The Federation president says the idea will be put to UEFA on Tuesday, when an emergency video conference is being held with 55 member associations to try and figure out a way forward. Now, Ferrari has suspended its Formula One team operations and closed its car factory until the 27th of March as a result of coronavirus. It's part of a wider lockdown that began last week across Italy. Ferrari says the decision has been made for its employees' well-being. Other F1 teams are still working for now, despite the uncertainty over when the season will actually start. Now, an unbeaten century by Australian Chris Lynn took Lahore Qalandars into the semi-finals of the Pakistan Super League in Lahore. Multan Sultans, who've already qualified for the semis, lost Moeen Ali in the first over, but Gushdil Shah made 70 as the Sultans fought to 186 for 6 from their 20 overs. The Lahore openers then put on a century partnership. Pakistan's Fakhar Zaman with 57, but it was Lynn who was the star of the show, hitting the winning runs with his 8th six of the day. The Qalandars will play Karachi Kings in the first semi-final on Tuesday. Now, as you know, there isn't a lot of sport in the diary at the moment, but there are a lot of meetings. Top Flight Rugby Union in England could be the next big sporting league to postpone fixtures due to coronavirus. Premiership Rugby is considering a 12-week suspension of top flight games due to the outbreak. A special meeting will take place on Monday when clubs will discuss a range of potential next steps.
How long the postponement is for is up in the air. It'll all be discussed on Monday. It could be 4 weeks, could be as many as 10 or 12 weeks. But there is a feeling at Premiership Rugby that continuing to play in the current climate is simply unfeasible. So that call will be made in the next day or two. And I'm also hearing that European Cup Rugby will also be postponed. The quarter-final weekend is scheduled for the first weekend of April. That won't be happening. They will also put their rugby on hold for the foreseeable future as well.
Well, horse racing in Britain is expected to continue behind closed doors until the end of March because of coronavirus, with the sports leaders meeting to discuss the decision on Monday. The British Horse Racing Authority says that a decision on the staging of the Grand National, which is under 3 weeks away on April the 4th, will be announced as soon as possible. And finally, with the English Premier League season suspended, it is safe to say there are plenty of players with a lot of time on their hands. But Liverpool's Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain isn't spending all his time worrying about how his side are going to win the title. Here he is with his girlfriend Perry Edwards from girl band Little Mix with a perfectly choreographed dance routine showing that even at times like this, he is just going to keep moving. As ever, you can get all that sports news. It's on our website. It's bbc.com/sport. But from me, Chetan Partek, and the rest of the sport team, that is your Monday Sport Briefing.
That is, our thanks to Chetan and the team for that. Now, I'm just watching social media as ever. Thank you for all your comments to #BBC The Briefing. You've got various comments about your views on coronavirus, how it's being tackled in different countries, what government actions being taken, etc. Your views. It's really interesting to hear from you. One tweet that is proving to be getting everyone's attention right now, which is someone I follow. It's Robert Reich, who is a professor at Berkeley, former Secretary of Labour in the US government, and now works in the area of lecturing about labour, etc. This is a tweet he's put out there about 12 minutes ago. It's being retweeted constantly at the moment. It says McDonald's, Burger King, Pizza Hut, Dunkin' Donuts, Wendy's, Taco Bell, Subway. None give their workers paid sick leave. They should be required to post this sign on their doors because we don't give our workers paid sick leave. They may be sick when they serve you. That is his tweet, which, pardon the pun, seems to be going viral right now. I'll be back with your business briefing in just a moment.
Well, some good news on the weather front. Monday is expected to be quite a sunny day across most of the UK. The weather fronts that we had during the course of the weekend have been pushed away towards the east as this area, this gap in the cloud here, high pressure builds in from the Azores, and that's allowed the skies to clear overnight. But it is going to be nippy, quite a widespread frost first thing in the morning on Monday. So let's have a look at these temperatures. In some parts of northern Scotland, it could be as low as around -4 degrees, but probably closer to -2 in the lowlands. Cardiff there at around freezing, and even in Plymouth itself, a real nip in the air. With the exception of a few areas of cloud, it is going to be a sunny day across England and Wales, eastern Scotland too. But you can't miss this. This is the next weather front that's coming in, and it will bring rain to Northern Ireland and western parts of Scotland later on Monday afternoon. But the vast majority will have a fine sunny day. Now here's Tuesday's weather forecast, and a weather front's kind of slicing the UK in half. It's between the high in the south and the low pressure in the north. And what does that mean? Well, it does mean that there will be more cloud around on Tuesday. In fact, many western and northern areas will be pretty cloudy, and in fact we're expecting some heavy rain pushing in here to Northern Ireland and again western parts of Scotland. But these are southwesterly winds, so those temperatures really will be picking up mid-teens quite widely across England. And those conditions will continue through the course of Tuesday and into Wednesday, meaning that these southwesterly winds will persist. A weather front still with us, so again a fair bit of cloud, some rain around as well. Different story here in Scotland. You can see the wind direction. It's more of a west-northwesterly, a colder source, so here temperatures will be lower. We're talking maybe around about 7 to 8 degrees Celsius, whereas in the south, where we have that southwesterly flow of air, around about 16 degrees. Now Thursday into Friday, a bit of a question mark exactly what the weather's going to do. The thinking is there will be a weather front parked across the south of the UK, and that does mean that Thursday and Friday we could catch some rain, particularly across southern parts of the UK, and then it'll probably dry out come the weekend again. That's it. Bye-bye.
I'm here at this hospital where they're already experiencing the benefits of AI. This is seriously cutting-edge technology.
Wouldn't it be good if firefighters could use technology to see what they're getting themselves into?
This is a very innovative project to protect the environment.
It's called the artificial tree.
You have to give them credit for blazing the trail.
The new tool to reboot democracy and find common ground amongst the most polarised of views.
Encrypted messaging apps to avoid interception from the police.
One thing that we know you will see is the expansion of the internet off the planet.
The Take on Tech. Click,
Saturday and Sunday at 12:30 on the BBC News Channel.
We need double-time recovery right now.
In a world of complex global news stories, we'll sift through the information to bring you what matters most. And with reaction and reporting in real time,
our immigration laws are a laughingstock all over the world.
You'll know what's happening around the world as we do.
And that these new measures won't actually stop Venezuelans coming over, it will just make the migrant crisis worse.
Whatever the story, we'll piece it together on Outside Source. Join me, Ros Atkins, tonight at 9 on the BBC News Channel.
Business briefing time with me, Sally Bundock. Cut and cut again. The US Federal Reserve slashes interest rates for the second time in just 2 weeks. And with major sporting events cancelled or postponed, how does the sector survive the coronavirus outbreak? And if we look at financial markets, you can see the last-minute flurry of activity on the American markets before they closed on Friday. But futures indicate Wall Street will open limit down. There'll be a big plunge in the value of shares in the US when they open later. In Asia, as you can see, it's a similar story. In a rare move on Sunday, the US Federal Reserve, America's central bank, cut interest rates to near zero, and in cooperation with other countries around the world, it will engage in quantitative easing. All of this as the number of cases of coronavirus continues to go up. Samira Hussain has more from New York.
Across America, the economic damage is mounting as businesses close and people are asked to practice social distancing. This weekend, New York City felt very much like the economy is grinding to a halt. The 9/11 memorial is roped off. There are few people in the streets. The public schools have all shut their doors, and even Starbucks will serve you coffee, but no hanging about in the shop. Recognizing the impact coronavirus is already having, America's central bank took an unprecedented move on a Sunday, cutting interest rates to near zero and launching a $700 billion stimulus program in coordination with its European partners. The president seemed pleased with the Fed's move.
That's really good news. It's really great for our country. It's something that we're very happy. I have to say this. I'm very happy.
His Treasury Secretary went so far as to say the country is not in a recession in an interview with ABC News on Sunday.
The president's former top economic advisor said that he feels we are now in a recession. Is he right?
I don't think so. But I think the real issue is not the economic situation today. The real issue is what economic tools are we going to use to make sure we get through this.
But so far, the government has failed to enact legislation to help the U.S. economy. The coronavirus bill has passed the House, but the Republican-led Senate has yet to even schedule a vote. While Washington continues to fight among themselves, it is everyday Americans that will bear the brunt of this crisis. Some 70% of America's economy is made up of consumer spending. So it's hard to see how social distancing doesn't fast become an economic slowdown. Samira Hussain, BBC News, New York.
Well, Asian markets today are pretty choppy as they respond to the US Fed's action and the actions of other central banks. Let's go to our Asia Business Hub. Mariko Oy is there for us. Nice to see you again, Mariko. So just tell us how things are going. We're coming to the end of the trading day, aren't we, in Japan, for example?
That's right, Sally. And earlier we were talking about how traders have been really waiting for a couple of hours for that announcement by the Bank of Japan, which moved its monetary policy meeting to today following that Fed's move. And they did announce further monetary easing, which pushed the Nikkei into positive territory ever so slightly. But now we're seeing the Nikkei back in the negative territory. The fall is not as sharp as the rest of the region, though, where we have been seeing a much sharper sharper fall. Basically, investors seem to have been somewhat spooked by the fact that the Fed had to do this on a Sunday evening when their scheduled meeting was only a couple of days later. And it probably didn't help by the fact that China just released its first economic data, which show the impact of the coronavirus outbreak, and they're not looking great. Retail sales down some 20%, factory production plunging at the sharpest pace in 30 years. Of course, China has been dealing with this for a couple of months. So we're talking about the economic data for the months of January and February. And this really goes to show how badly China's economy has been affected. And of course, we now know that this pandemic is a lot more global, as Samira was mentioning, the impact on the US economy. So this kind of numbers could be something that the rest of the world could expect going forward.
All right, thank you very much. Mariko, who's watching the markets for us at the moment? Well, the coronavirus epidemic is causing chaos for many industries across the world. One of the biggest losers from the outbreak is sport, which over the past week has come to a virtual standstill. On Friday, the English Premier League announced all games will be suspended until at least the 3rd of April. The suspension will be a blow for clubs, their sponsors and fans. For example, in the 2018-2019 season, a global audience of 3.2 billion people watched the matches around the world. Well, Gareth Bolch is with me to talk through all these issues. You can see there that the NBA basketball last Wednesday, they announced the suspension as well until further notice. And that, as you saw on that graphic, costing the NBA over $500 million. Well, Gareth, thanks for being on the programme. Just talk us through the implications for sport. Obviously, there's so many different types of sport all over the world making their own choices. It's just the beginning, isn't it, of massive disruption?
It really is. Last week, we saw the unravelling of sport, and sport so often is a microcosm of broader society, and we saw sport being hit early and hit hard last week. But I think it was only just the beginning, as you say. This week, we're going to see further postponements, and we're going to see further wranglings about how this is all netted out. I think the costs and the implications of this are currently uncalculated. And whilst I'm sure sport will come out of it stronger, it's going to be very hard times for a while.
I mean, you say sport will come out of it stronger, but some will be very, very vulnerable, won't they? Those smaller clubs, football clubs in the UK that are, financially quite strapped anyway. Yeah. If they have to close their doors, not have matches, not get the money in for the tickets, they could go under, couldn't they?
For sure, that's true, and that'll be the case in many sectors as well. Sport as a medium, I think, will come out stronger. The place that it has in our lives is going to become obvious as we're empty without it. I think what's true though is sport businesses, the face of that might change. So many of the businesses that are going to be hit hardest by the schedule, I have the most competition to happen in the coming months and or have the weakest cash reserves. You're right, they are either going to go under or have to repurpose themselves as businesses. But sport as a medium, I believe, will continue to flourish after this situation. But clearly, it's a really difficult one.
Obviously, the Olympics is not up in the air, according to the Japanese government. They're saying they're planning for it to take place in July this year. But many are looking at that event and thinking, really, could they go ahead with this?
Yeah, which is hugely scary. And there's a whole raft of sports events from June onwards that have yet had no movement in it, be it Wimbledon, be it the Olympics Ryder Cup later in the year as well. It's going to be a very difficult time and a nervy time for administrators and anyone in a responsible position. And
when it comes to, broadcasting, ticketing, the suppliers, I mean, just talk us through some of the implications.
Yeah, the implications are far-reaching. As I say, I think uncalculated so far. For athletes, this is hugely difficult as their dreams come to an end. But for broadcasters and for sponsors and for agents and so on, there's going to be a really difficult time where people are going to have to recut their budgets and look at the world in a different way because it's not going to add up in the same way it used to.
All right, we've got to leave it there. So much more to discuss, but we haven't got time. But thank you very much indeed for coming in today. So let's have a look at some other business stories. Goldman Sachs has downgraded its US growth forecast for the first quarter. The US bank says it sees growth hitting 0% in the first quarter of this year. That's down from its original estimate of 0.7% expansion. That said, it says it expects economic activity to recover after April with strong growth in the second half of this year. The French luxury goods firm LVMH said it would begin producing sanitizing hand gel. It's French factory, should I say, that produce perfume and makeup for brands such as Christian Dior and Givenchy will temporarily change its production line starting today. The group says 12 tons will be produced as soon as this week and will be delivered at no charge to French health authorities. Germany is to partially close its borders with Denmark, France, Austria and Switzerland to tackle the spread of COVID-19. Commuters and goods will still be allowed across the borders, but millions of Europeans are already in lockdown across the continent. The Scandinavian airline SAS says it's temporarily halting most of its flights from today as demand for flights has more or less disappeared. SAS, part owned by Sweden and Denmark, said on Sunday it would temporarily lay off up to 10,000 employees, or 90% of the airline's total workforce. So these are the markets. We've got 20 minutes to go in Japan, down just over 1%. Hong Kong down 2.5%. Australia, again, very weak, down nearly 4% on the day. Let's look at the next board. You can see the price of oil going down by 3% as well. That's how things ended in the United States. A flurry of activity at the end of the trading day on Friday as investors and traders were hoping for announcements from the White House in terms of measures they could take to help businesses, to help households as they grapple with the economic impact of coronavirus. So those measures still to be announced. It's hoped that there will be some measures announced coming from the White House. Today, as I've mentioned, markets in the US are expected to open a lot lower when they do. That is your business briefing. For the past few weeks, we've all been told the best thing we can do to prevent the spread of coronavirus is to wash our hands and not touch our faces. Although you might have recently found it's harder than it seems to break a habit of a lifetime. Psychologist Natasha Tewari has these tips to give you a hand.
Don't touch your face.
Contagious. And I haven't touched my face in weeks.
Because we can't help it. It's part of our DNA. We're hardwired to do it. So every time you tell yourself, stop touching your face, don't touch your face. If I touch my face, I'm going to get really ill. You're telling yourself to do something that is entirely unnatural to you. When we touch our faces, what we're really doing is calming ourselves down. The irony is, at a time when it's more important than ever to not touch your face, unconsciously, your mind is constantly moving to a place where it can better protect you by doing the things that it knows will soothe you. Whilst it's almost impossible to totally stop touching your face, a key way that you can go about making it easier would be to take out the habits which lead you to do it. So that might mean wearing glasses instead of contact lenses. It might mean wearing less makeup so you don't have to top it up throughout the day. It might also mean creating habits around how you use your hands. So rather than perhaps when you're always moving around and having your hands like this and making it so easy for them to land on your face.
I touch my face all the time. I'm really conscious of it now. Now, Downing Street says it's stepping up efforts to keep the country informed about plans to tackle the outbreak and how people can protect themselves. Boris Johnson will start a daily televised news conference today, which will then be either led by himself or a senior minister. So a daily update coming from the Prime Minister or someone else in government. More on that story on Breakfast at 6 o'clock here on BBC One. You're with the briefing on BBC News. Let's remind you of the headlines. We saw drastic action from the Federal Reserve in the US to tackle coronavirus. It's cut interest rates to 0.25% or a range from 0 to that, and announced coordinated action with other central banks. Germany's imposed border restrictions on 5 countries as the death toll there continues to rise. Well, it's just about the only story in town when it comes to what the global media is discussing today. Let's take you through some front pages. We've got Spain's main daily El País showing the Prime Minister on a video conference with the country's regional leaders discussing the dramatic lockdown they've put in place there to try and tackle the spread of coronavirus in Spain. The UK's latest measure against the virus is being covered in the Daily Mirror. It's looking at the advice that over 70s should prepare to self-isolate for possibly up to 4 months. It says there are lots of questions about how the government will protect the vulnerable. Washington Post has the news from the Fed that we've just mentioned, the US central bank cutting interest rates, an emergency meeting and announcement on a Sunday, very unusual. In Germany, Deutsche Welle reports the Trump administration offered vast amounts of money to a German company for a coronavirus vaccine that would be exclusively for the US if they were able to buy it. And BBC News reports on the impact the outbreak is having on the aviation industry. UK airlines seeking financial help from the government. And then another story in the Spanish press, the King of Spain renouncing an inheritance from his father reportedly worth millions of euro. Well, Jeremy's back. As promised, Jeremy Thompson-Cook, Chief Economist at Equals Group. So let's get stuck in. El País talks about the measures being taken across Spain. Pedro Sanchez during a video conference with all the regional leaders. Now, Spain has to come together right now, but this is a country that's seen huge division with, Catalonia, with its bid to try and be independent, etc.
Yeah, and the Basque Country as well. Years of history of the limitations, let's just say, of the union within Spain from Madrid out towards the regions, and even on this call, it's been reported that the leader of the Catalan region, Quim Torra, coming out and saying that this was
he wouldn't sign the final communique.
Exactly, an invasion of his powers, as El País is reporting it today. It does show that there is still a political problem with power within Spain, but also the fact that this is an emergency almost that no country has really planned for. That there is a significant amount of pressure on both local, municipal and state and federal authorities throughout Europe and in individual countries.
And in Spain, their numbers are quite high compared to other countries. Number of deaths, 288, double the count of the day before. More than 7,750 people actually are infected. I mean, the numbers are climbing and climbing in places like Spain, places like Italy. They have to take drastic measures.
They do. It may come to pass over the course of this next week that Italy actually has more deaths than China, and these are the kind of things that obviously European leaders are trying to prevent against. Not many people have been talking about Spain as a hotbed for this virus, but it does seem that the numbers have exploded over the course of the past couple of weeks, and this has been always a problem with the Schengen area, for example, the free flow of people around Europe, and therefore the free spread of this virus.
So El País looks at the measures to take effect, emergency measures starting Saturday night. So it affects the whole of Spain for 15 days. They're in a state of alarm, which means there's a big restriction on movement,
freedom of movement. Yeah, if you leave the house without a good reason now, in some cases you can be fined, or they're talking about jail sentences as well. And we're seeing this all over Europe, that this isolation is not just self-isolated, people taking themselves out of community and saying, I'm going to stay at home. The government is now mandating it, apart from obviously in the UK at the moment, it seems.
Well, we shall talk about the UK now. I mean, we're looking at the Mirror with its take on protection of the vulnerable. Many papers have got this, and social media, about what might be announced in the UK. The thought that those over 70 might be asked to self-isolate for 4 months.
4 months, yeah.
Which is a heck of a long time. This is the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, being interviewed on Sunday on the BBC with various bits of bobs that we're now having to sort of get our heads around. This talks about charities calling for action to help the elderly and the vulnerable. I mean, it is a big issue if anyone over the age of 70 can't get out and get food.
Can't leave the house, can't go out to get food, can't go out to pick up medicines they may have for other health conditions, for example. Plus also, we've talked about it a lot in recent years, the the broad fact that there's a huge amount of loneliness, for example, for elderly people who may be stuck at home, who may be widowed, for example, or kids have left home, and therefore the psychological effect of being isolated away from society for 4 months is going to be pretty huge. So
I must admit, where I am, we've got a WhatsApp group that we've created now just for our neighbourhood, so that we can keep in touch. If anyone is in self-isolation, we can know, we can help them, etc.
Yeah.
I mean, you were saying there's a similar thing.
Yeah, there's a similar thing where in the part of southeast London that I live in, that people are coming together, and yesterday they were flyering, putting things through people's letterboxes to say, if you are self-isolating, if you are vulnerable, if you do have these underlying health conditions and you do feel scared.
And that's what we've got to do.
Exactly, but it's also that kind of, you've got that dichotomy at the moment where on one side we're seeing communities come together, on the other side you've got people panic buying and buying 48,000 toilet rolls and not leaving some for other people. Hopefully we see more of the former and not the latter, but we'll wait and see.
So the Washington Post, Fed slashes interest rates to zero as part of a wide-ranging emergency intervention. What does the Washington Post say about this? What's its take on how effective this might be?
Its take is, I mean, it's the broader kind of market narrative is that this is exactly what the Federal Reserve can do, but more has to be done by other actors within this, and obviously that means the US government. The fact that it's been coordinated with, other measures have also been coordinated with other central banks. The Bank of England, European Central Bank, the Bank of Japan, for example, are establishing larger what they call swap lines, which basically allows for funding between these central banks to make sure that market dynamics don't lock up as they did back in 2008. But it shows that business is going to be put under a huge amount of pressure as a result of this, not just in Q1 where we are now, but Q2, the 3 months into the beginning of July.
Are you of the view, though, that when the worst is over, as it were, and we see both in Europe and in the US it going in the right direction as we're seeing now in Asia, we might see this sort of V-shaped recovery? So as quickly as we go down, we return and we see a jump up.
I think we'll see a fairly healthy recovery once things start to look better. But there's reports out today, for example, that from the health authorities here in the UK that the infection may last as long as next year, for example. So that obviously precludes a very, very swift bounce back. But also, we have a thing in markets where we say we climb up the stairs, but we fall down the escalator. We fell down the escalator and are falling down the escalator over the course of the past couple of weeks. It takes a long while to rebuild those losses.
And also, as well, it's not about rebuilding the losses necessarily. A lot of small and medium-sized businesses could actually go under in the midst of all of this, and that leads to job losses, unemployment levels going up, and there's a real lag, isn't there?
Yeah, there is.
In terms of the impact, the economic impact.
We're talking about the market impact after the Federal Reserve's cuts last night. If you'd told me 5 or 6 years ago, the Fed cut interest rates to zero and launched $700 billion of quantitative easing, and
because of a virus,
and the futures are down by the most they can be overnight, I'd have said you're mad. The Australian market closed by 9.7% lower this morning, the biggest fall ever. This is a sign that it's not just in monetary policy that needs to be done, and it is, as you said, those small and medium-sized businesses. We just don't know the effects yet, and it's going to be hugely, hugely negative.
Deutsche Welle, Trump offers large sums for exclusive access to coronavirus vaccine, and it says that there was an aggressive takeover bid taking place, this article claims, and that if the US were to get the rights to this vaccine, it was going to be for US patients only.
For US patients only. This is and it's an incredible story. That this company CureVac, which is obviously based in Germany, and actually gets a lot of its funding away from the German health authorities, and research done with the German health authorities as well. But they had a American CEO, and apparently the Trump administration reached out to them and said, if you are developing something, if it proves to be able to vaccinate against the COVID-19 virus, then the US would like exclusive rights to it. Now the US CEO is no longer the US CEO; it's been taken over by a German. So I don't know what you want to read into that.
The Germany authorities have confirmed this story.
They have confirmed it, but have also confirmed that that's not going to happen. That it would be a vaccination for everyone and not just well-paying Americans. Let's put it that way. So, as much as he is now starting to, I think, get a grip on what it means for the U.S. economy. Certainly, there's always these there's always these stories that make it show that it's probably chaos in the White House.
And one thing we've already mentioned, BBC Online, and we've got about 20 seconds to go, coronavirus, future of UK aviation at risk, say airlines, we will need emergency financial support. Yeah. And I mean, it's a given, isn't it? And it's not just that industry.
It is. Any travel, any mass transit is going to be hugely affected by this. And a lot of airlines are financially precarious at the best of times. You know, you look at, for example, Norwegian Air, for example, which is basically a flyby for transatlantic. It's cheap, it's run very, very, very small margins. They are at real risk.
All right. Thank you very much indeed, Jeremy, for coming in. And thank you too for your company, whatever you are up to today. We hope you have a good day, whether you are out and about in self-isolation. We will keep you informed here at BBC News, whether it's on television, on radio or online. See you very soon.